This morning's reading is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through to the end of 16. If this sounds familiar, it's because you just all read along with the kids. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven.
I thought maybe I'd have a little fun with your memories and say, did you realize we read the same passage twice? But see, how many are really aware or awake? The passage that the kids are using upstairs is really one of the classic passages in the New Testament. It's one of those that people are aware of, at least in part, even in non-religious context. And I think it's always important to, and I thought since this is on our minds, obviously, that we can spend some time with it this morning. In Matthew 5 here, Jesus tells 2 out of 3 of what are referred to as the images of influence that he uses. One of them, there's the idea of leaven that is used. And sometimes it's used more in a negative way. You know, the idea of leaven, of yeast, a little yeast goes into the bread and the bread rises, it fills with those pockets of gas. If you made a loaf of bread, and one of the things that happens to people when they're cooking, sometimes people forget to add ingredients. Sometimes somebody makes something and says, oh, I forgot the baking soda. Or, oh, I forgot the yeast. Well, think about what would happen to a loaf of bread if you didn't have any yeast in it. You'd have a pretty dense piece of dough, wouldn't you? And the idea being, Jesus talks about bewaring the leaven or yeast of the Pharisees. That their influence has a way of turning people to, if we were using the Star Wars imagery, turning people to the dark side, turning people to do things and to think things and to attitudes that are just not really conducive to God's people. But the two that Jesus uses here, the idea of salt and the idea of leaven, are really very important and kind of what we want to think about. So Matthew 5 is part of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5, 6, and 7, 3 chapters. You want to challenge, really stretch your mind, memorize all 3 chapters. It's doable. And it's kind of handy to have that because this embodies a lot of the teaching that Jesus gave in a very practical way about how people live. It begins with the Beatitudes and the ideas, the values that really shape kingdom thinking. And then it comes into a section about persecution. Blessed are you when men curse you, persecute you, revile you, say all kinds of evil about you because of me. He's not just saying, blessed are you if you're having a bad day. I mean, we like to think that. Or blessed are you if you're suffering the consequences of a bad choice that you made. But what he's talking about is the idea of Christians, his followers, his disciples, who are undergoing opposition, even as he talks about, from members of their own family. And he wants his followers to know that he considers them to be fortunate and blessed because they have something really worthwhile. And pointing to the idea that great is your reward in heaven. This is the nature of discipleship. I don't think it's a stretch for us to, realize that when many authors have decided to write about discipleship, one of the great classics about discipleship, The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who was executed by the Nazis. And Bonhoeffer took his book about discipleship and he built it off of the Sermon on the Mount. Because in this section of teaching that Jesus gives us are really the essential ideas of what it is to follow him and what it is to be like him. So, Matthew 6 has, which is the second chapter, has what I think of as God's secret service. It's kind of a laughing way to think about it. But I want to think about this as we, before we get into thinking about being salt and light, in that when Jesus is talking about being salt and light and people observing us and watching us, that they will see your example, that he has something in mind here that may not be what we typically would think. He begins in chapter 6 talking about giving alms, helping people, your gifts to other people who are in need. But he says, don't let them be seen of men. Prayer. He talked about the Pharisees who like to stand on the street corners so that they could be seen of men. They want everybody to admire them because they are such religious, holy people. Fasting. We don't encounter fasting today like they did back in the ancient world. When a person was grieving, a loss, when somebody was grieving their sin, even their nation's sin, in the ancient world, it was not uncommon for them to weep with sackcloth and ashes and to fast. It was a very open and obvious thing that they were doing. But with all of these, Jesus says, well, no, don't do this so that people will see you. Don't do it for, could you say for effect? Don't do it for attention. That your treasure is in heaven. And if you're doing it to be seen by people, if that's what you want, then when you get their attention, that's your reward. But when you give, when you pray, when you fast, do it in secret. Make it private. And your treasure will be in heaven. See, it's a question of motive that he has in mind here. There are people, and we encounter them, that they're just really concerned with getting attention and recognition. I always think about, those of us who have parents who've had little children, we've heard that Daddy, Mommy, look at me, watch me, see what I'm doing, because they want our attention. And with a little child, that kind of affirmation is a good thing. But when you get an adult who's engaging in what we call attention-seeking behavior, where they want people to notice them and to see what they're doing, it's like what Jesus was talking about, the Pharisees giving to the poor on the street. And they do it in a way that actually is very demeaning and humiliating to the person they're helping, because it's not about the help. It's about the recognition. The motive for God's people, Jesus is saying, is doing good. One of the most interesting summaries of the life of Jesus in the Gospels just simply said, he went around doing good. Can you imagine that as a legacy for your life? Can you imagine that's what's going to be your obituary? That's going to be what's on your tombstone? He or she went about doing good. Not because they wanted recognition, but just because that was the kind of person they were. It is the nature, that's what Jesus is trying to tell his disciple. It is the nature of a Christian to do good. And we'll notice some passages in Titus here that I think are really interesting. Paul in writing to Titus is an evangelist. He's been left, in Crete. And his responsibility is to try to get things straightened out in the church and get Christians living on the right way. And he talks about Christians who are eager to do what is good. One of the things that I just love about Christians today, many people in this congregation, is that all that needs to happen is for people to become aware of a need. And there's a response that people are eager to help. There are just so many ways for them to try to do that. So chapter 3 talks about Christians being ready to do whatever is good. So eager and ready. But then in verse 8, kind of as part of an admonition, this is one of those statements that Paul gives to Timothy and Titus that are kind of a take it to the bank kind of a statement, something that you want people to really remember. And to Titus, he wants people to remember those who have trusted in God may be careful to devote themselves in doing what is good. So eager, ready, and devoted to good. So for the Christian, this becomes about reputation and character, not to be seen. But the thing about it is that if we are doing what God intends, what Jesus intends for us to do as his people, we will be noticed. I was really impressed with something that happened many years ago with the first congregation that I worked with. It was a small congregation. And it was a Sunday evening. And somebody needed to find, it may have even been the police, needed to find somebody in the congregation. And they had talked to one of the neighbors of this person. And the neighbor had said, I know where they are. They're at church. Sunday evening, they're at church. They are always at church on Sunday evening. I know you think about what that says. People are watching. People are seeing. They're noticing. It's not because we've set out to do that. We don't go down the street saying to our neighbors, hey, notice me, look what I'm doing. But rather the idea is we are going about, like Jesus, quietly doing good. And it's having an influence. It's setting an example. It's showing people what being a Christian is really all about. What we don't realize is that one of the things I like to think about is that, we talk about trying to find ways to influence other people and share the gospel with them. You go up to somebody and you just start hammering them with a Bible or preaching at them. And what's going through their head is, do I want to be like this person? And they're thinking, no way, I want to get away from this person as fast as I can. But when they see that quiet, positive example, to see the good that Christians do, they say, I want to be like that person. I want to be somebody who is caring, compassionate, kind, loving. One of the things that, mentioned with the announcement a minute ago that today is the clothing giveaway day for, the clothing room open for, this afternoon. And one of the great privileges that I have are people that come in, into the building during the week from the community. They've seen the sign, or they know. We had a couple come in last week, and they were bringing some boxes of clothes. And she was telling me how many years ago, back at our old building on Osborne Street, she had needed clothes for her kids. And she had come, she had found out about the clothing giveaway, and she had come and she'd gotten the clothing that she needed. And that over the years, she's been back a few times, and now she's in a position that she can share clothing that she has with other people. And I think that's really the idea that Jesus is talking about. Many of us have seen the movie Pay It Forward. And we've kind of used that theme a little bit in little flyer that we give out at the clothing giveaway to kind of say to people, we're not looking for money. We don't want a donation. That's always a fun conversation, isn't it? Those of you who've helped. It's always interesting to talk with people about, we're just trying to help people. You don't want any money? They look at you like, I've never heard of a church that isn't asking for donations. And we say, well, what we really want people to do, if they're appreciative of what we're doing for them, is to go out and do something for somebody else. Many, many years ago, I read a little brochure that was written by George Pepperdine. Now, many of you are familiar with the name Pepperdine because of Pepperdine University. Well, George is the guy that started it. And he did a little tract, a little brochure called "The Better World Begins With Me." And that was basically the idea is that what would happen in the world if each one of us would take seriously the idea of doing good for other people and encourage them to go out and do good for others. Doing good will be noticed. It will be evaluated. It will be appreciated. So the idea of salt, the salt idea has been discussed extensively. We talk about salt as a preservative, salt as a flavor. Specifically, Jesus is talking about salt as a flavor because if salt has lost its saltiness, it will be good for nothing except to be thrown out. I kind of want to laugh because, we had some snow this past week, and I had to get some salt out and salt the walkway outside because in the morning it was ice. It wasn't later in the day, but in the morning it was ice. And so we do throw out salt too, but not because it's lost its saltiness, but because it also melts the ice. But the point Jesus is making is it's about flavoring. It's a taste. There's some things in life that just are not worth eating. Somebody's going to say, well, I eat it without. Years ago, when my dad was still alive, he had some blood pressure problems. His doctor told him, said, I want you to eat a cup of white rice every day with no seasoning, no salt, no butter, no gravy, no soy sauce. Just plain white rice. And Dad told me that was the toughest thing he'd ever done because of just the nature of that. There are things that we enjoy with, and the medically concerned people are going to get after me and say, well, we are eating too much salt. Yeah, we are. Okay. The point is, though, that as a flavor, as a seasoning, And so that's what Jesus is saying, is that if it's lost its flavor and its ability to give flavor, then it's useless. And then the idea of what he's using it is that a person, a Christian, who's lost the ability to have a good influence, to do good for others, what does that say about them? See, in Mark, there's a really interesting thing that Jesus says concerning salt. In Mark 9:30, he says, be filled with salt. Which is kind of a different image when you think about it. And peace. Kind of extending the idea of the influence of salt even to the idea of sharing peace with others. Light. I think most of us know what it's like to drive across the prairies at night. Most of the light's coming from the stars and sometimes the moon. Cloudy night, you may not have any light. And so when you see that light off in the distance, and you know that represents where you want to go. You can't hide the light. That's the nature of light, is it opens the darkness. Shows you where you're going. And so he speaks of hiding of, no one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl, or the older translations say a bushel. And you realize, okay, yeah, that's going to put it out too. The idea of lighting that lamp is and that's what Jesus is saying, is my disciples are going to be out there, and they are going to be lights. They are going to be seen. They are going to do good for others. They're going to have that life of good. It's going to be an intentional life. Yes, there are unintentional side effects from life. And there may be things that we do that share good with other people, and we didn't even realize it. That's great. But the reality is that we are intentionally choosing to do good to the people that are around us. And that's the shared part of this, that we share with others, that we give, that we do. Things like the clothing giveaway, the food that goes to Winnipeg Harvest. There are just so many things. The eyeglasses that people put in the box out there. There are just so many little things that people can do, but there are things that we do not just as a congregation, but as individuals. I'd like to challenge you, to find someone that you could share something with this week in a very quiet, very personal, very helpful way. Maybe in a way that they don't even know where the help came from. But something that's a benefit to others. That's why I called this lesson Lighted Up. Because I think sometimes we allow our example, our light, to be dim, to not be out there, not something that people can see. Imagine if somebody's looking at our lights. Are they seeing a big beacon that, what did Jesus say here? He said, let your light shine before men in such a way they see your example and glorify your Father who is in heaven. See, we help bring them toward God because of the quality of the light that we shed. But what if our light is dim? There's a line in the song, lest, our dimness and neglect. Sometimes that happens too, doesn't it? Let's think about our light and our example, the good that we're doing in the lives around us. We sing our last song. And as we're singing that, remind you that if you need to talk with me, with Chad and the elders about your relationship with God, if you want one of the elders to pray with you, you can make that known and talk with us after. Let's stand as we sing.